I have been asked whether, in the years to come, it will be possible to kill 40 million American people in the 20 largest American towns by the use of atomic bombs in a single night. I am afraid that the answer to that question is yes. I have been asked whether there is hope for the nation's security in keeping secret some of the knowledge which has gone into the making of the bombs. I am afraid there is no such hope.
Enrico Fermi stood in his office and looked out over Manhattan. He cupped his hands to the size of a tennis ball. A little bomb like that, he said, and it would all disappear.
Al-Qaeda is determined to acquire nuclear weapons and to use them if they get them.
We are on the edge of the beginning of World War III.
Situémonos en enero del año 2000. No habían caído las Torres Gemelas, había prosperidad, nadie imaginaba que algo muy parecido al tren del 29 se acercaba a toda velocidad.
¿Cómo diablos no hemos detectado esos misiles?
No son los soviéticos, señor. Me comunican que la fuente de energía está generada por el Doctor Manhattan. No hemos detectado esos misiles.
Sería como el pánico de 1837, el pánico de 1893, la hambruna soviética del 32.
Hiperinflación.
Colas para el pan. Revueltas.
Lo sé, lo entiendo.
Y al principio lo llamarán la crisis americana, pero en unas 6 semanas lo llamarán como lo que es. La Segunda Gran Depresión.
Señor Villasana, muy buenas noches desde Madrid.
Muy buenas noches acá desde México.
¿Por qué se monta esta operación, según usted?
Sí, bueno, yo tengo la sospecha de que estén preparando un nuevo autoataque terrorista en los Estados Unidos, al igual que el 11 de septiembre fue un autogolpe. orquestado desde los servicios de inteligencia estadounidenses y del ISI pakistaní y del Mossad israelí. Entonces, yo supongo, porque además conozco este proyecto, yo tuve en mis manos el documento del Pentágono, 2 documentos, en donde se planteaba ya un siguiente autogolpe en los Estados Unidos para justificar una agresión, ya no contra Irak y Afganistán, sino ya en esta ocasión contra Siria y sobre todo contra Irán. El segundo documento al que me refiero es una orden del entonces vicepresidente Dick Cheney, diciendo que en cuanto venga este golpe terrorista, entre comillas, inmediatamente se realice un ataque contra Irán sin investigación de por medio de dónde provino este nuevo ataque. Entonces yo quiero suponer, porque además pues he estudiado cómo operan estas personas, que muy probablemente estén preparando un próximo autoataque en los Estados Unidos.
Tirar abajo un sistema que ya estaba decrépito y sustituirlo por algo nuevo. ¿Quién sabe si el tan cacareado nuevo orden mundial?
Described by some now as the most successful terrorist since Osama bin Laden. And his final words to a U.S. Army unit as he left an American detention camp in Iraq were, "I'll see you guys in New York." Now that was back in 2009. Now, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is leading the brutal ISIS militant group on its bloody rampage across Iraq.
Estos ataques de bandera falsa son acciones de guerra realizadas para culpar a un tercer país o a un tercer grupo y aceptan tomar ya bajas previas, como diciendo, bueno, es parte de la acción de guerra. Los que murieron en el World Trade Center, en las Torres Gemelas, y bueno, fueron 3.000 muertos previos a la guerra de Irak, que después, sí, Estados Unidos generó 2 millones de muertos y sigue subiendo la cifra. Y lo mismo en todo Medio Oriente en general.
One national security threat to the United States. I continue to be much more concerned when it comes to our security with the prospect of a nuclear weapon going off in Manhattan. Manhattan.
Estos eventos no son fortuitos, no ocurren porque Osama Bin Laden lo hizo y no ocurren porque hay un nuevo grupo de terrorismo fundamentalista.
Renowned author and expert Joel Skousen breaks down the globalist plan to shut down America and stage a new world war.
This is going to be the mother of all terrorist attacks. It's going to make 9/11, a government operation from beginning to end, look like a picnic.
And they engineered on record in hindsight World War I to get League of Nations.
That's right.
World War II, engineered, financed, enemies built up to try to get it. And then they're going to use World War III. I mean, that's their plan. That's their program. That's what they do.
That's right.
You know, know, I've been in public speaking for 60 years, and what I'm about to say this afternoon may be about the most important topic, the most serious topic, and the most alarming topic that I have ever talked about in those whole 60 years. Important understanding the truth about 9/11 is as perhaps our best available means of forestalling that terrible possibility. Now, I'm the third person, I think, to remind you of what Brzezinski warned Congress about last February, that an attack on Iran would lead to a spreading and deepening quagmire, and that it would very probably be preceded by, and these are his words, a terrorist act in the United States blamed on Iran.
And I emphasize what I'm about to say. The final destination on this downhill track is likely to be a head-on conflict with Iran and with much of the world of Islam at large. A plausible scenario for a military collision with Iran involves Iraqi failure to meet the benchmarks, followed by accusations of Iranian responsibility for the failure, then by some provocation in Iraq, or a terrorist act in the United States blamed on Iran, culminating in a quote-unquote defensive U.S. military action against Iran.
It almost sounds as if we should invite him to our conference. He doesn't say an incident by Iran, he said an incident blamed on Iran.
Or a terrorist act in the United States blamed on Iran, blamed on Iran, blamed on Iran.
He doesn't say an incident by Iran, he said an incident blamed on Iran, and that, of course, is what frightens all of us here so much.
It's a joint military training exercise involving local police, also military. In your apartment!
I am in my apartment, sir.
Go back inside right now!
I am inside. I have two words for you. Predator drones. You will never see it coming.
Flag incident where some ship goes down and you be used for the excuse to accelerate the next war.
Sobre todo contra Irán. El segundo documento al que me refiero es una orden del entonces vicepresidente Dick Cheney diciendo que en cuanto venga este golpe terrorista, entre comillas, inmediatamente se realice un ataque contra Irán sin investigación de por medio de dónde provino este nuevo ataque. Entonces yo quiero suponer, porque además pues he estudiado cómo operan estas personas, que muy probablemente estén preparando un próximo autoataque.
I think it's absolutely essential. One of the things I worried about 12 years ago and that I worry about today is that there will be another 9/11 attack, and that the next time it'll be with weapons far deadlier than airline tickets and box cutters. And when we have a situation developing in Pakistan, for example, where there are nuclear weapons, where supposedly that technology has been sold to the North Koreans.
Esto es un golpe de Estado a nivel global. Aquí lo que se busca es crear una situación de emergencia para imponer una serie de medidas no solamente ya impopulares, sino despóticas, y efectivamente convertir a la población en esclavos, pero esclavos consentidos. Es decir, llevarla a un límite de sufrimiento tal que cualquiera que llegue con una solución mínima, cualquiera que ofrezca un puesto de trabajo por un cuenco de arroz, será visto como un salvador y será visto como alguien bueno y positivo. Se trata de llevar la crisis hasta el máximo.
Iranian regime supports violent extremists and challenges us across the region. It pursues a nuclear capability that could spark a dangerous arms race and raise the prospect of a transfer of nuclear know-how to terrorists. Its president denies the Holocaust and threatens to wipe Israel off the map. The danger from Iran is grave, it is real, and my goal will be to eliminate this threat. Iran has strengthened its position. Iran is now enriching uranium. Its support for terrorism and threats towards Israel have increased. Those are the facts, and they cannot be denied. And I refuse to continue a policy that has made the United States and Israel less secure. We will also use all elements of American power to pressure Iran. I will do everything in my power to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Everything in my power to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Everything.
Well, world wars change worlds. And if you have a global agenda, then global problems allow you to offer global solutions. And if you look how the world was transformed by the First World War and the Second World War, the world was a completely different place after both of those wars. And the idea all along has been to have a third world war to complete the transformation into a global state with a world government and a world army dictating to the global population. And there was a letter, a controversial letter because people dismiss it, but with the passage of events it becomes more and more credible. And it was a letter written by a man called Albert Pike, who was a massive Freemason in the United States in the 19th century. And it was to another Illuminati infamous character called Mazzini, Giuseppe Mazzini. And it detailed 3 world wars that would transform global society. And the first one described it in the terms that happened. The second one it described in terms that it happened. But, you know, you can say, well, it came to light later, so, you know, maybe they just put that in and faked the accuracy of the first 2 wars. So the credibility of what it said lies in what it said about the Third World War. And it talked about creating a conflict between the Muslim world and what it called political Zionism. And people will say, well, that's got to be a fake because there was no Zionism when that letter was supposed to be written. Well, this is an agenda that's projected a long way forward. This is why Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, and Eric Blair, George Orwell, 1984, who knew each other. Huxley taught George Orwell French at Eton College, where the royals go, and they knew each other and they became friends. And from the same sources, not least the Fabian Society in Britain, they understood the projected agenda. And we're talking there in 1932 that Huxley's book was published, 1948 that Orwell's book was published, and they are describing the society that's unfolding today at that time. And there are many, many other examples of people predicting the future who were insiders who have turned out to be incredibly accurate. So the idea that Albert Pike would know that this Zionist movement was coming and the establishment of Israel was coming is very credible when you look at the background evidence. And of course, Zionism was established not that long after this letter was supposed to be written. And so he was talking about the Muslim world being brought into a war with the political Zionism, what today we call Israel, and that this would, you know, in my terms, create a vortex that would draw in the world, in our terms, America, the European Union, NATO, into this war. And what you have now is a situation that this ISIS group has come out of nowhere, in effect, incredibly well armed, incredibly funded. I mean, I've seen figures like $2 billion at its disposal. And it's walking into towns in Iraq and taking them over. It's established itself at the key border crossings into Syria and into Jordan. And it's all happened really fast. And what the potential of this clearly is to do what Pike was talking about. Because I've said in my books for years that the plan was to create a massive divide and rule conflict between the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. I mean, I know it's hard to believe for anyone frickin' sane, but this argument over, this ancient argument over who should, you know, be the natural successor to, the rightful successor to Muhammad and all that stuff, has created this enormous schism. And schisms are there to be manipulated and exploited by these people. So what you have, therefore, is this ISIS that suddenly appeared with its grotesque violence that is representing Sunni Muslims. And then you have the regime currently in Iraq that is representing, in effect, Shia Muslims. And you have, just across the border, the center of the Shia Muslim world, and that's Iran. Iran, 89%, I think it is, of Iranian Muslims are Shia. Now, in the last little while, there's been this, apparently on the face of it, this strange change of direction by America in terms of Iran. They've spent all these years with Israel saying, well, you know, we must take out their nuclear facilities and these sanctions against them, and all they're terrible. And now, if you remember, in the last week or so, they've even been talking about maybe they ought to get into discussions with Iran and come to some agreement on how they deal with this ISIS situation. And it's like, what? Yeah. But when you come from this perspective, what they're doing is they're trying to draw Iran into this Sunni Shia conflict, like, you know, protect the Shia that this Sunni ISIS are threatening and overrunning at the moment. And once they get Iran pulled into that vortex, it ain't going to get out. Yep. Then there's another aspect of this, which is a real red flag for me. And that is this ISIS organization is very extreme, and its very name, when you break down the wording, is describing its ambitions, and that's to take over Iraq, to take over Syria, and to take over what they call the Levant. And what does the Levant include? Israel. So here you have this extreme Muslim group, or actually the army, actually saying in its own name that our intention is to take over the Levant, to take over Israel. And you'd think at any other time, even with a lesser situation, Netanyahu would be surrounded by microphones and he'd be saying, we must be protected, Israel is in danger. Instead, he's come out and said, "Oh no, no problem. You leave them to it. America, no, don't intervene. Leave them to it. Don't let them basically weaken each other." And then you've got the United States. Their reaction. I mean, it sums up the ludicrous nature of it, that John Kerry has gone to Iraq and he said, well, we know about bloody airstrikes because, you know, we might kill civilians. Well, that's never stopped you in the past, mate, has it? Or any of your predecessors. And what it seems to me as I'm reading this is that they're all standing off to let this ISIS get a big foothold in that region. And then if it moves to the point where it starts to threaten Israel, then the button will be pressed. Then the Americans and NATO will come in because they're committed to protecting Israel's security. And then you'll start to see why that sliver of land called Israel, with less than 8 million people, has one of the best equipped armies in the world and a nuclear arsenal. Yeah. Because what Pike was talking about was drawing all these different disparate groups in and creating this vortex of mutual self-destruction, which would change the war that would change the world, taking on from the previous world wars that changed the world, and then at that point their global fascist society would be brought in. No doubt justified by, we need a world government and we need a world army to stop this ever happening again, even though we who are saying that actually created it. And then you've got what I've been saying now way back in the 1990s. The idea is for this Third World War to involve Russia and China against the West.
Yeah. Oceania versus Eurasia, yeah.
Yeah, in the 1984 kind of scenario. And what you have now is the demonization of Russia. Have you noticed that? How suddenly we got the demonization of Russia? And what's opening up in the Ukraine, while all this is starting to go on in the Middle East, is another front against Russia. Because, you know, it's very easy to see how Russia can be pulled into this Middle Eastern conflict by supporting Syria, because destroying Syria is part of ISIS's agenda and American agenda and NATO's agenda.
And also Iran as well.
Yeah, and destroying Iran, yeah. So, and Russia would come out in support of Iran, and the same would happen with China. And so you can see how it's how the pieces in the game are being moved around to create this scenario that Pike talked about. A close aide of President Putin, who has special responsibility for Ukraine, has actually said this week that the United States is preparing for a war against Russia through Ukraine, and that what they plan is to try to take Crimea back. Now, you can have the odd bit of terrorism and bad things happen in Ukraine to Russian supporting people, and Putin can stay back and hold his fire because he knows what they're trying to manipulate him into. But if they try to take Crimea back, Putin's ego and Putin's pride will no way, I would strongly suspect, allow him just to let them do it.
Exactly.
And therefore, that if they try to take Crimea back, then what you're looking at is a war, or a calculated war against Russia. Yeah. And if you start a front against Russia on its borders, and then all this stuff going on in the Middle East, you are diluting Russia's impact on what's happening in the Middle East. Yeah. And it's all a setup. And when you have Saudi Arabia and Qatar, who are 51st states of the United States, there are many of those, mind, funding this ISIS and funding this terrorism, while the Americans, who could tell them to stop any time, are saying, are condemning the very terrorism that their 51st states are supporting, well, the picture's so bloody obvious. It's a setup, and it's a setup to attempt to trigger World War III.
Control from Raqqa in Syria to the gates of Baghdad. This translates into a swelling confidence. Proclaiming a caliphate it promises will stretch from the Mediterranean Sea all the way to Iran. A caliphate is an Islamic state under a supreme religious and political leader known as a caliph. ISIL is considered more violent and brutal than Al-Qaeda, while sharing its ideology of holy war, jihad, and a determination to scratch out largely Western-imposed borders of long standing and reimpose its own order. ISIL has put all the region's countries on red alert. Jordan is taking the caliphate threat very seriously. ISIL doesn't have open support from a particular country, but experts say most of its individual sponsors are in the Gulf states.
The ISIL is not the manifestation of the failure of U.S. policy that the United States is trying to present. It's actually the manifestation of U.S. policy. This is a clear manifestation of what the United States, including Israel, to the south of Syria, have been trying to do in this region for over a decade. The objectives is to divide both countries and to create sectarian states. This has nothing to do with Islam. The idea of an Islamic emirate now is something that the United States has been pushing. Anybody who talks about that isn't aware of history or has no understanding of Islam. And the United States has been pushing this as a camouflage, and many in the West believe that the ISIL represents Muslims. It doesn't represent Muslims or Sunnis at all.
This chaos is instigated by the West. It's been heavily trained and heavily funded since, for the last 6 or 7 years. ISIS was actually started around 2006 or 2007, and they've been training with Americans and British in Jordan and also in Turkey. And there is a lot of cooperation in what's being now called the Kurdish regional government area, where this was actually separating from Iraq and was trying to deal directly in the oil business because they were producing more oil than they were getting paid for. So this is a region whereby the West understands that if they break it up, it becomes weaker. If they leave it together, it becomes stronger. So in a tactic that's been used over and over again, this has been going on the Iraq and the Syrian border for quite some time. The Syrians were beating the well-trained individuals that were well-funded and well-trained, about $2.5 to $3 billion over the last 3 years alone. And it's coming from Qatar. It's coming from all the puppet states that are very pro-Western, and they're getting these weapons from the West. And it's happening over and over and over again. In fact, only 3 weeks ago, Obama approved another $27 million. And now they're talking about approving 4,000 Hellfire missiles for the Iraqis. They've just sold Saudi Arabia $75 billion of equipment from the West. So don't tell me that this is not a Western calculating move. There is tons of equipment going into this area, and it's not coming from Russia. It's not coming from China. It is coming from the West.
the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.